I'm just talking about how we are exiles in this culture and how we as Christians need to view our politics. Before I get going, I want to encourage you, and I've been encouraging over the last several weeks, if you go to walk the dog, you bring the dog. If you go to church, you bring your Bible. Okay, so it's like this, they just go together. So this is what we're doing. I'm not going to be highlighting the news or any other news rag or magazine. This is where we're looking, and it's important that you don't take my word for it, but take the word for it. All right, I have been known, just so you know, and I called it out, to teach things that weren't in the Bible just to catch you because people teach things that aren't in the Bible. So I literally did an entire lesson that had nothing there was nothing from the Bible, but I said it did. And at the end of the service, I said, how is that? And everybody's like, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, too bad I just taught you totally something's not in the Bible. And they're like, wait, what? I go, yeah, I said it was, and I put it up there, and everybody's like, yeah, but it wasn't in the Bible. So I encourage you, don't take my word for it. The reason I do that is because a lot of people will take this book and go, it doesn't make any sense to me. I open it up, and it's like, I don't know, I don't understand it. It takes some time, for sure. One of the things that has stood out in my conversations is we're reading out of something called the New Living Translation. There are just translations that are just old and really hard to understand, sometimes using words that are like, what does that mean, right? And so this has taken the Greek, the Hebrew, the Aramaic, the ancient languages that it was all written in, and brought it into modern English. Taken the meanings, taken the structure of the Bible. It's all the same words, just brought to language I understand. One of the ways that we get this out to you, the New Living Translation or any Bibles, is we have a resource center. It's called Grow on the Go. Grow on the Go. And so what we do is we get our Bibles at a place called Bibles at Cost. And then we just pass that on to you. If you want to go to Amazon or Costco or whatever to get your Bible, good for you, go. They get Bibles for sale everywhere. We just get them at cost and oftentimes even lower it from there because I want people to have this. And so that's why we read out of NLT. But here's something that has come up over the last several years, and it's something new. I've never seen anything like it. It's called the Filament Bible. This is the Bible that I use, the Filament Bible. When I've been in the church a long time, and I don't know about you, for those of you who've been around, when people used to bring study Bibles to church, anybody ever see that? And they're like, hey, I got my Bible and come to church, And they're walking into church, and they're like, and they go, okay, pastor. And they put it down, and it's thick, and it's got all, you're like, check it out, man, crazy study Bible, right? Right? Listen, this is a study Bible. This is a study Bible. Here's why. They have taken this and taken our phone and put the two together. So when I take my phone and I scan it over the page number, it turns it into a study Bible. And all of a sudden, I've got maps and charts and personality profiles. And I'm like, what? There are cartoons, movies. There are times I'm on my app just going, what the? And I stop reading the Bible. Go, get back to the Bible. But the beauty is, I can just read the Bible sometimes. I don't know about you. I start reading the Bible, and I'm like, ooh, what's that? And then I get all caught up in the notes and stuff. I'm just reading the Bible. But when I go, what is that talking about? I don't understand. I get my phone. Oh, and it turns this into a study Bible. It gives me all of this information. We have these in the resource center. Catch it. It's $20. Not the app, the Bible with the app. So that's why we did that. I was like, that's a great thing that I don't have to carry that big, and when I want to study, I can, but when I want to read, I am. So I encourage you with that. I encourage you, if you don't have a Bible that you like to read, that's the number one reason people don't read the Bible. I don't like it. I can't imagine. It's my personal conviction. It is a sin to bore people with the Bible. When there is that much amazing content, how could people go, what's the special at Denny's this afternoon? It's like, what in the world? There is amazing stuff in here. So we're going to dig into it as we get into this series. I have been concerned over a long period of time now, last several years, on what's happening in this world and what it means to serve a king and a kingdom that is not of this world. And so I started a series. My first one was called Voter Virus. And I just went, man, it was contagious. Something happened to the church. There was some kind of sickness in our culture that got into the church. And I was like, what's that doing over here? I get it out there because that's already a broken system. But God's given us another way, and the virus started affecting us. And then I did another series called Living Faithfully, and it was just like, hey, do you understand what God has called us to be? And then at the beginning of this year, I did a series called Resident Aliens that kind of gives a context for who we are, who the Bible says we are in the context of this life. Well, last week, I gave this concise definition for the word political, because political is thrown around all over the time, right? The use of a structural power to organize a society or a community of people. Listen, it's not good or bad. It's neutral. This is neutral. It's what's done with it that makes us upset or goes, yeah, okay? But it's just the use of power to create the sanitation department, parks and recs, cities that have nice flow of traffic. That's all that is. That's all political. And so I want you to understand as I do this series that I am not in any way anti-American. I am very much pro-kingdom, which I think people make, whoa. You can't do it. Well, that's what the Bible calls us to. I'm trying to break the binary requirements of moving to the political left or the political right, and instead align with God's vertical third alternative called the kingdom. That's what we've been called to. But we get caught up in the ways of the world and the words of the world, and then we start repeating the words of the world instead of the word of hope, the word of peace. Let me pray this morning. Father, I want to thank you for your word because it directs us. It gives us wisdom, knowledge, understanding. I pray that we would have eyes to see it. I pray that we would have ears to hear it. What is it in your revelation, the revelation of you and how you interacted with us and continue to interact with us? I pray that we would see it this morning. We would hear it this morning. In Jesus' name, let it be so. Let it be done. In this series, we're going to learn a lot about a nation called Babylon. Babylon is an old city, the ruins of this ancient city. It happens back here in Genesis originally. The ruins are located in present-day Iraq, about 55 miles south of the city of Baghdad. It's just a pile of sand today. But what I want to do to make that happen, to get familiar with Babylon, I've asked Pastor Yolanda Spencer to join us. Grab that mic, Pastor Yolanda. To join us for what I'm calling the Babylonian Minute. Right? I'll tell you why. In the Bible, right, there's so much about Babylon, but Pastor Yolanda and her husband Jan had pastored in the Antelope Valley for 40 years. And I won't tell you that they are retired. They can't. They try to say, oh, we retired. No, they didn't. They've been here at the sanctuary, part of our family, for the last 8 years. And Pastor Yolanda has her, watch this, it's pedigree, baby. I had to write it down. She has her bachelor's degree in social sciences in 3 subjects: history, psychology, and sociology. Those really go together, by the way. And her master's degree is in American history. She and I have gotten together and go, I'm just a history geek. You know, it's like, oh, wow, I love to find out history and go, because I don't want to repeat it. And so we've gotten into conversations about history. And the stuff that she teaches right now at Western Ministry Institute and the King's University, she's teaching all kinds of history courses. But I was like, Pastor Yolanda, again, one of our assisting ministers, I said, would you come up and I want you to uncover Babylon for us. Archaeological digs, things that we've discovered about Babylon, because right now it's just a word on the page. But I wanted you to hear from Pastor Yolanda, so go for it.
First of all, I like to always get at beginnings of things. So I looked this up biblically, and there's a man associated with Babylon. Cush fathered Nimrod. You've probably heard that name, and we usually use it as a negative thing, you Nimrod. He became a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. And then it goes on to say he moved on to Nineveh. But he is credited for having begun Babel. So why am I going there? Because antiquities, biblical scholars associate Babel, that location, with Nimrod as the founder, with Babylon. Nimrod had a huge personality, it looks like. At least that's what the antiquities say about him. He convinced people they needed to build that tower. And if you know anything about the tower,
there's a tower.
It was going to the sky, and it was built on human reliance, human arrogance. And God said from heaven, I'll read the words to you. He said, then nothing they do or they plan to do will be impossible for them. And that's when God sent that confusion, confounding, so the languages were changed and they couldn't build anymore because they couldn't talk to each other. And that is the source of Babylon. This is the beginning of Babylon, confusion and confounding.
Thank you, Pastor Yolanda. Yeah. So we're just gonna kind of dig in a little bit, because throughout the series we're gonna be talking about Babylon. We're gonna learn about Babylon, and what the thing is that when you move beyond where Babylon is happening, and it stops right about there, it gets destroyed, right? And then it picks back up and finds its power. And then by the New Testament, it doesn't exist anymore. And today, as I said, it's a pile of sand. The Bible refers to Babylon in another context, and it represents any nation that is Babylonian-like. Any nation that is wealthy, powerful, and oppressive. Most of us would say, oh, that's Russia. The new Babylon is China, right? We want to do that. You've heard people make these things. They're such a Nazi. See, that's what that, so it's that kind of context when they go, oh, Rome in the New Testament says Rome is Babylon. The Bible actually refers to, and that's where it gets kind of confusing. You're like reading, you're like, wait, why is Peter talking about Babylon? And he was talking about Rome. He's just saying, oh man, Rome is so Babylonian, right? So that's just kind of the way that works. But in this series, I'm going to be talking about Babylon. In this series, I'm also going to be talking about empire. Now, empire, most people think you got to build a Death Star to be an empire, right? But that's not the case, right? Empire is, again, more about what I talked about earlier, the political structures that are used to lead, to guide, to shape, to dominate other people and ultimately other nations. Sometimes one nation will voluntarily submit itself to an empire. We want your leadership. We want your protection. Protect us. Your empire could protect us, right? Other times, empires will force submission. They force their submission on people through violence, through threats of violence, maybe economic sanctions, other tools of domination. That's the way empires function, right? Sometimes we're looking at that definition and I go, okay, empires. That's what happens when I see that happening in the Bible. God's people find themselves in several empires. So back here it's Egypt, right? Then Babylon, then Persia, then Greece, and then by the time you hit the New Testament, again, it's Rome. So the people of God here are under empires in numerous times. They're being conquered by empires. And the thing is that I see it happening and I go, and please know this, I'm not a political scientist, and I know that the United States doesn't identify as an empire, but it has become an informal empire-like nation. And we just have to deal with that. We have to know that and go, okay, I get it. Because listen, it has military bases around the world. Fleets of globally deployable aircraft carriers. Strategic alliances on every continent. We have global technology that can direct orbital satellites or guided missiles. The United States has the ability to dominate most parts of the world, or at least make its influence known and felt in a matter of hours. A phone call, an email goes out, right? And that's the connection that I'm making when I say the U.S. has kind of become an informal empire-like nation. The last word that I'm going to be using in this series is the term exile, and it's in the title, right? And this word, exile, has so many layers and shades. It's just crammed all into this one word. Because exile is a place, but it's not just a place. Exile is much, much more. It's a human state of being, but it's not necessarily a human state. Exile celebrates its lack of worldly power. Exile celebrates its lack of connection. Exile celebrates it's like, I'm not a part of anything. That's part of what they go, oh yeah, that's the best part of it. Exile is shaped by our King. It's shaped by our King. Our King Jesus. It's listen to this, resistance and submission. That's exile. Exile is sacrifice and subversion. And we're going to see it, and we will continue to see it even through Jesus and his ministry. Exile is best seen when Jesus said it. Love your enemies. Wait, what? That is so weird. Love your enemies. What are you talking about? It's cultural weakness, and yet it's divine power. Well, Jesus, you could have conquered all, and you surrender. It's hard. Today, what I want to do is I want to look at just 4 examples. 4 examples of God's desire for God's people. I want you to hear that. God's desire, we're going to pull it right out of Scripture. God's desire for God's people to be countercultural. I want you to hear that. The loving our enemies thing. That's not cultural. That's countercultural. I know what you do with my enemy. You punch them in the throat, right? That's what you do with your enemies, right? But Israel was called, consistently instructed. You're to be set apart. You're to be what I'm calling an upside down kingdom, even while they were literally an earthly kingdom. God gave a leadership blueprint for Israel. He gave this leadership blueprint for kingdom that actually reads kind of like a mirror opposite of anything and everything we have ever seen in the history of the world. Think about monarchies, democracies, oligarchies, aristocracies, dictatorships. Pick the leader. What you're about to hear this morning, the way God says, this is the way my people are to function. And again, he's talking to Israel, and I'll get to how he's talking to us. He's saying, this is how I want my people. And it's a stark contrast from anything we've ever seen. God's leadership and kingdom blueprint turns everything inside out. So let's open our Bibles. Come on with me. Bible bookshelf, here we go. We're going into the Old Testament. We're going into the books of the law. These 5 books were written by Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Catch them. 5 books. They're called the Pentateuch. Pent, like 5-sided, pentagon, we call it, right? These 5 books are written by Moses. I'm going to be in the last one. It's called Deuteronomy. It's in the first books of the Old Testament, first 5 books. I'm going into Deuteronomy chapter 17. Deuteronomy chapter 17, I'm going to start in verse 14. And I want you to hear God outlining for us. He outlines, he goes, hey, this is what it means to be a kingdom under me. A kingdom not of this world. Wait till you hear how otherworldly this is, all right? But here he goes, verses 14 through 20. This is God speaking. Keep in mind the people of Israel have been stuck in Egypt for 400 years, and they're now released, and he goes, hey, I want to say this, while you're out of Egypt, I have something to tell you. Here it comes. You're about to enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you. And when you take it over and you settle there, you might start thinking, we ought to have a king to rule over us like the other nations all around us. If this happens, actually when this happens, if this happens, listen to what he says. Here's the instructions. Be sure to select a king, the man the Lord your God chooses. Make sure you select the king as the king, the man the Lord, because here's what we do. Oh, he's so strong, he's so handsome, he's so eloquent, he's such a good speaker. And God goes, choose the one I'm choosing. Trust me when I tell you this. Watch this. He keeps going. Watch this. If this happens, choose the one I'm choosing. You need to appoint a fellow Israelite. He may not be a foreigner. And then here comes the instructions, verse 16. The king must not build a large stable of horses for himself. He is not to send his people to Egypt to buy horses, because the Lord's told you this, don't ever go back to Egypt. The king, verse 17, must not take many wives for himself, because they're going to turn his heart away from the Lord. Man, I can barely handle one wife. Solomon is like out of his freaking mind. 700 wives, 300 concubines. The man is cuckoo, right? I'm like, what? Right? He says, hey, he is not to take many wives for himself because they're going to turn his heart away from the Lord. He continues, the king must not accumulate large amounts of wealth in silver and gold for himself. Are you seeing any contrast yet? God's king, he says, when you want a king, this is the kind of king you need to have. And I got to tell you, I don't know how it functions, but I see our leaders, and I'm going, how did you get into Congress with $500,000 and you got out of Congress with $150 million? I'm like, how did you accumulate large amounts of wealth in silver and gold for yourself? How did that happen? I need to get into another business. Verse 18, when he, the king, sits on the throne as king, and this is a big motivator for me. Watch this. He must copy for himself this body of instruction on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priests. Here's what I did. I read this and I went, to be God's leader. Okay, and so you know what I did? I literally took my Bible, laid it out, and said, Romans. And I wrote out the entirety of the book of Romans, word for word. I just had a big book, and I wrote the whole, and then I did 1 Corinthians, and then I did 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, and then I did Ephesians, and I just kept writing out the Bible. All I was doing is writing word for word. When the Lord your God, destroys the nations, and I just wrote out all of it, because I was like, well, that's what it says. His leaders write out the instructions. Verse 19. Here's why. He's got to keep that copy with him and read it whenever he gets a chance. Oh, I'm sorry, daily. As long as he lives. That way, here it comes, that way he's going to learn to fear the Lord his God by obeying all the terms of these instructions and decrees. Verse 20, this regular reading is what's going to prevent him from becoming proud and acting as if he is above his fellow citizens. It will also prevent him from turning away from these commands in the smallest way. And third, it's going to ensure that he and his descendants will reign for many generations in Israel. I'm like, whew. Does that sound different kind of leadership structure to anything we've ever seen? This is the way God says, hey, well, listen, when you get into land and you're going to choose a king, first make sure you choose one I've chosen, and then this is the way he's to act. I'm like, ain't never seen it. Israel didn't do a good job of following this. And here's what happens. If you're taking notes and you got your app open, I got notes for you today. It gives us an upside-down kingship. That's what this is. It's an upside-down kingship. See, kingship was vital. If you were going to have a kingdom, you needed to have a king in the ancient worlds that was kingly. See, kings here were viewed as divine, having a divine connection. In the Old Testament, in Genesis, when Egypt takes over, it's like, oh, Pharaoh, he's a son of the gods. He's the son of the sun, Ra. Right? So Pharaoh, he's already divine. And so here's what's happening is I see this and I go, okay, see, these representatives of the gods, they possess lots of power. And typically displayed as God just laid it out right here. Here's how it's displayed. Harems. That's the way the gods were. They have harems. They've got lots of wealth. They've got lots of land. We'll get into how the land gets divided up here in a minute. See, so if you're going to tell a king that he's no different than anyone else, it's really telling him he's not a king. I'm like, wait a minute. Because God, and I think it's God's point actually, because God is the king over Israel. God is the king over all the nations. God is the king over all of creation. That's what's happening here. These directions that he lays out here, it kind of creates an anti-kingly king. That's not very kingly. Wait, you don't have a bunch of wives? That's not very kingly. Well, you don't have a bunch of horses? That's not very kingly. So here's what happens. We want to create this kingdom, but I'm like, that doesn't work very well. But you know what does? You know what I do see? I read that, and I go, all here, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John looks familiar to another king I've seen in the Bible, who has a kingdom not of this world. I read those instructions, I go, that's Jesus. Well, here's what happens. They get here in this land. He says, you're going to go into the land. And so God says, okay, listen, because, at one point you're going to want a king, but let's not do that, right? And so they live with what's at one point prophets. And then they have priests. And then they have judges to kind of lead them. Like, here's what's right and here's what's wrong, and you get punished for that. And so they have this thing going on here in the Old Testament. And then all of a sudden, 1 Samuel 8 happens. And you know what the people say? The very thing God said they would say. We want a king to rule over us like all the other nations. That's what it said right there. By 1 Samuel 8, which is over here, that's exactly what they said. We want a king like all the other nations. And so at the time, again, it's in 1 Samuel, Samuel says this, hey, listen, you don't want to do that. That is not going to be good. Don't do that. No, we want a king like everybody else. Well, okay, can I just tell you, listen, if you get a king like everybody else, he's going to take your daughters for his harem. That's cool. We want a king like all the other nations. Okay, listen, let me give it to you again. Listen, if you get a king like all the other nations, he's going to take your sons and send them off to war. Cool, we want a king like the other nations. Okay, maybe you're not getting it. Let me make it really clear to you. If you get a king like the other nations, he's going to tax you. He's going to take your money to build his palaces. He's going to take your money to fund his lavish lifestyle. Yay, we want a king like the other nations. I'm like, what is wrong with these people? And you can see the conversation happen. Samuel goes, this isn't going to end well. And they go, yeah, that's what we want. And that's exactly what happens. It's exactly what happens. He says, listen, kings have harems. This is what kings do. So that's the first one. Here's the second one, is that it's an upside-down militarism. See, Israel was called to be watch this, a demilitarized nation. And I got to say, it's described in almost comical terms. You thought this was weird. Watch this. Just turn one page over to Deuteronomy chapter 20. And God brings the instructions. Watch this. You're going to go, wait, what? Again, it's almost a comic routine, right? It's just wild. Chapter 20, Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 1 through 9. Listen to this. He says, hey, when you go out to war, this is God speaking. When you go out to war, when you go out to fight your enemies, and you face the horses and chariots, because you don't have any horses and chariots, remember? And he instructs us in that, right? And an army greater than you, right? Don't be afraid. What are you talking about? We have bows and arrows for their chariots. All right, watch this. He goes, here's why you're not going to be afraid. Because the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt is with you. When you prepare for battle, sharpen your swords, get your horses fed. No, watch this, man. When you prepare for battle, the priest comes. And he stands before you, and he comes before the troops, and he says this. The priest says this, hey, troops, get ready to go face armies that are better and bigger and badder than you, right? Hey, you guys, listen to me, men of Israel. Don't be afraid. As you go out to fight your enemies today, don't lose heart. Don't panic. Don't tremble before them. Here's why. Because the Lord your God is going with you. He's going to fight for you against your enemies. He's going to give you victory. Okay. Like where? Where is he? Where is he? And then we're not done. He keeps the instruction. Watch this. Once the priest is done saying, hey, you guys got it. God's with you. Right? Watch this. Verse 5. Then the officers come forward. Here comes the officers of the army, and they address the troops. You ready? Here it is. You got all the troops. You've gathered the troops. Here's the first one. He comes up. Hey, I'm quoting, by the way. I'm not making this up. Ready? Has anyone here just built a new house and you haven't dedicated it yet? Hey, listen, why don't you guys just go on home? You might be killed in battle and somebody else is going to dedicate your house. Bye-bye. Bye. Okay, good. Oh, hey, by the way, verse 6, has anyone here just planted a vineyard, but you haven't eaten any of its fruits? Hey, if that's you, why don't you go on home? Because you might die in battle and somebody else gets to eat its fruit. Bye-bye. Bye. Oh, wait, by the way, I'm not done. Verse 7, has anyone here just gotten engaged to a woman, but you aren't married yet? Why don't you guys go home too? Because why don't you just go get married? Because you might die in battle, and then somebody else is going to marry her. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Then the officers will say, more? You got a house you haven't lived in yet. You got a vineyard you haven't eaten fruit from yet. You got a fiance at home. Bye, go. Wait, there's more. Hey, if any of you is afraid or worried, if you're afraid, listen, why don't you guys go home? Because I don't want you to frighten anybody else. What do we got? One guy left? Who's left after that? I'm like going like this. Hey, yeah, I got an engagement. I'm like, hey, man, even if you're afraid, why don't you go home? He says, when the officer is finishing, right, then he talks to the troops and he appoints unit commanders in verse 9. Now that I got the men who are going to fight, those guys went home to dedicate their house. Those guys went home to eat some grapes. Those guys went home to meet their wives. These guys were afraid. So you are okay, so you're over those 10, you're over those 50, you're over those 30, and these are the people that are going to do the fighting. That's how they built an army. Does that seem like a productive way to build an army? Now, no offense, please hear me, but I go, man, I think some of the motivation to get into the military is I get a free education. They're going to educate me, and then I'll serve for 6 years, and I'll get out, and I'll have the GI Bill, and I'll be able to buy a house at a cheaper percentage rate. And I hope we don't go to war while I'm in the service. No, he says, why don't you go home? Why don't you go home? Why don't you go home? This idea of demilitarization, here's this definition for you. Militarization. The belief or policy that a country should maintain a strong military. We are capable, we are prepared to use it aggressively to defend or promote our national interests. This is militarism. And God says, not my people. What? It's hard for me to understand. Because here in the Old Testament, when you got kings and a strong military, man, those just go together. That's like hot dogs and baseball, man. If you're a king, you got to have a strong military. Successful kings don't just simply defend their borders, they expand their borders. And how do they do it? A strong military. To protect and extend their power, kings were building these strong armies, militaries, and the bigger the better. But something's happening. Something's happening, and it's over here in the New Testament. A cross stands up, and it's casting its shadow across the Old Testament. And you can see it. In fact, in Psalm 33, look how he encourages them. In Psalm 33, verses 16 and 17, he says, hey, you know, the best equipped army can't save a king. And its great strength isn't enough to save a warrior. You watch these military guys, like, they're muscle bound, they got arms and everything. Bullets go through fat as easy as they go through muscle. That's what he's saying. Your great strength isn't enough to save you. Don't count on your war horses to give you victory. Because with all of its strength, it can't save you. And he goes back, he goes, I'm for you. I'm like, wait. In God's upside-down kingdom, things aren't always as they seem. We all know that lions rule the land. But sometimes a lamb is more powerful than a lion. I just don't get it. It's very upside down. So much upside down. I mean, we've been taught right. See, militarism makes sense in the context of a right-side-up kingdom. But he's calling for us an upside-down kingdom. But we're taught in a right-side-up kingdom. We're taught so well. It's easy. Our 26th president taught us well. Look what he says. Speak softly, carry a big stick. That's how you go far. Whack. I was taught this. I'm like, right. That's very different. Did you hear what just happened in Deuteronomy chapter 20 versus Teddy Roosevelt? I'm just telling you, it's upside down. God's ideas are upside down, and I struggle with it. Here's the third piece, an upside down economics. This is hurtful because empires are built on a hierarchy of wealth. That's the way empires are built. There has to be money flowing. And it's in total contrast to what the Bible prints out for us. Because the land of Israel, watch this, and there's way too many scriptures for me to get into on this one. The land of Israel is divided among the people according to their families. Oh, you got a bigger family, then you get more land. You don't have a bigger family, you don't get as much land as the bigger families. And it's the clans that were all spread apart, right? Listen to this, Israel's kings and priests weren't allowed to own agricultural land. Why? Because they could charge for the food. They go, hey, I got this whole harvest. I'm the king, so I want some more money for that too. So kings and priests weren't allowed to own land. They were to depend on the tithes and the offerings of the people. Listen to that, kings and priests, instead of holding power over the people, priests were dependent on the power of the people. That's how they lived. And so people would go, here, I brought you my sheep, so you got lamb chops tonight. Here, I brought you my cow, you get tri-tip, no Rattler's barbecue sauce, but enjoy, right? It's like, here, this is what the people did. And then every third year, watch this, every third year, all those offerings went straight to the poor and disenfranchised. Every 50th year, they did something called the year of Jubilee, where slaves and land is all returned to its original owners. Best time to take out a big old loan? Year 49, right? It's like every 50 years they cleared everything away. And just to see it for a moment, all debt is erased every 50 years. So you have a family who's going, son, I'm sorry, we just don't have enough money and I got to borrow some money, but in order to borrow it, you're going to go work for him for the next 20 years or whatever. And then as we got on more debt, you're going to keep working for him. Anybody feel like you're working for the man, right? Okay, this is what's happening. And every 50 years, all debt is wiped away. Imagine how the release of debt, the return of land that's been previously sold, the mandatory release of slaves prevented the disenfranchised from falling into this endless cycle of poverty. God had an idea. We just go, nope. In fact, I'm going to charge a bigger interest rate. And then we get threatened by the boss because he goes, do you want to lose your job? All right, I'm enslaved. I got to... When Christians think about money and economics, we got to stop letting the Babylonian rhetoric shape our values. We are a generous people because we serve a generous God. That's the way it works. And he has an upside-down kingdom and with upside-down characteristics. Here's the fourth one. It's the last one. It's an upside-down social class and power. I'm kind of cheating on this one because, quite honestly, if you take the first three, the upside-down kingship, the upside-down militarism, and then this last piece of upside-down economics, it kind of all trickles down. Here it is, trickle down. It all trickles down into this, an upside-down social class and an upside-down power class. Israel is instructed to reject the hierarchy of social classes. And again, by power, I'm going back to that definition of the ability to influence and coerce people and their behavior, usually backed by force. Again, our boss, you want... Hey, we're having layoffs. You better perform. Okay. That's the way we coerce people. We do it with our children. Do you want dessert? Hey, listen, whatever works, right? That's the use of power. I want you to know something, though. Skepticism about governmental overreach, right? Economics, that didn't originate with modern conservatives. That's nothing new. The rejection of wealth gaps, unequal hierarchies, that didn't originate with modern liberals. Those were God's ideas. It's all here. Again, I can't tell you, there's so many verses that go with all of this. I'll put them in our social media feed this week because there's a ton of verses where God says, this is the way we function. But they're countercultural ways, these laws and codes that he lays out to us. And they're all wrapped up in a mission statement. And it's a pretty simple mission statement. Exodus 19, they've come out of Egypt, and here's what God says. You're going to be my kingdom of priests. You're going to be my holy nation. Now, keep in mind, he's talking about Israel. We'll get to us in a minute. He's talking about Israel. You're going to be my kingdom of priests. You're going to be my holy nation. This is the message. I want you to give it to all of Israel. You're my people. I'm going to be your God. And the byproduct of that, if his people, if Israel lives to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, the byproduct is you and me. Here's what Isaiah says in chapter 49, verse 6. I'm going to make you a light to everybody that's not Jewish. I'm going to make you a light to the Gentiles, and you're going to bring my salvation to the ends of the earth, to many people. To many people. When you live as a light to the nation, you'll bring freedom to a lot of people. See, Israel's distinctive socioeconomics and politics were intended to show the world a better way to thrive in God's creation. Unfortunately, Israel didn't choose some of the things that we've talked about, many of the things we've talked about. They failed to embrace the upside-down desires that God had. God's desires for God's people, they are upside down. And you know what? That's why Jesus showed up in the New Testament. He goes, I asked you to do it here. Let me show you what it looks like over here. And Jesus showed up and goes, hey, the kingdom is here. The kingdom is near. And you know what our response was? Kill him. All he said was, hey, be good to people who are less than you. Take care of the poor. Treat others the way you want to be treated. How offensive was that? Because it stood up in the face of politic, earthly politic. This kingdom stuff, that's a radical departure from what I know. Hey, make sure you care for the poor. Hey, make sure you take care of that person who's robbed and left for dead. I know you don't like those people, but treat them nicely. Here it comes, ready? Let's crucify this guy. Love your enemies. What? Did he just say enemy? This guy needs to go. That's kingdom politics. Love your enemy. Wait a minute. See, throughout the New Testament, God's upside-down desires for God's people, he's writing it all down here. And again, it's written to Israel. It's woven into the mission of the church. That's you and me. What God asked of Israel is now asked of us because we're now included into the kingdom of what he said he was going to do. See, if you, Old Testament, are a light to the nations, then us, Gentiles, are going to come and be a part of the kingdom. So the very thing that God asked Israel, he's now asking the church because we're his people. We're his upside-down people. And today the church finds itself living in all kinds of nations. But we're still called to be a kingdom of priests. We're still called to be a light to the nation. The church is called to a holiness, to be distinct, to be set apart as we're living in this world. Not to be inwardly focused. We are not an end to ourselves. And let me be very clear. God was never, and he is not now, trying to somehow separate out the pure from the impure. You know what he was doing? He was outlining that nonconformity is the basis by which we work for change. He says, don't conform to that way. Don't do it that way. It won't work. I'm telling you, it doesn't work. Consistently, all over the place. And as Christians living in and not of America, again, we're not anti-American, but we are set apart to be countercultural. It's simply not enough to be a subculture. Christianity has been a subculture, and we're okay with it. And I just don't think that was what Jesus had in mind. Here's a subculture. Subculture is a smaller group of people or groups of people within a larger culture that share unique rules and ideas. Okay, so when you think about like a subculture, you got, Comic-Con and cosplay. You got hip-hop and hipsters and steampunk and skaters. You got Harley owners. Oh, see? Right there. You got Harley owners. See, it's like, that's okay. We're just really unique. We all wear orange and black. we get together for this ride for this. But we love this. This is cool. We're just a subculture. The difference is a counterculture is very different. Watch this. Counterculture is a type of a subculture for sure, except that they reject the larger culture's values, standards, and norms. So here's what happened. In the 60s, we called them hippies. And they said, we don't wear shoes, man. We don't believe in shoes. We like not wearing shirts. We just got free love. That was the hippies. Watch this. Another one. It's happening right now. The Amish. They want their carriages, but they like our roads. They simply go, all the color in your clothing doesn't make any difference. It actually separates you guys, so we're just going to wear blah colors. They're countercultural because they're rejecting the values. You say electricity makes our life easy. I think we're supposed to be working harder. And you don't seem to be doing much better with all your electricity, so we reject your electricity. Wait, what? We live by candles. Huh? That's no way to live. We make our own food. We create our own thing. They've rejected standards, norms, values. What we read in the Bible today, that's countercultural. What we read right here, that's totally countercultural. It's God's upside-down desires for God's upside-down people. I go, that's what he wants from us? Because here's what we do. Somebody comes and yells at us, we yell louder. And then they bring a stick, so we bring a knife. And then they bring a gun, and we bring a bazooka, and they drop a bomb. This is the way it works. But God says, no, my people are countercultural. If we're going to be a light to the nations, the church is going to have to live differently than the nations that we're living in. Not just in personal holiness, but I believe in socio-political holiness.